close. I don't know if I've got the skin for such a close-up angle. My name is Dakota and I have been a full-time artist for around 2 years now, and 1.5 years ago my debut collection of poetry and prose, where is it? Unsun Swallowing, was released into the world. What was initially a passion project, a pure experiment conceived out of a love for writing, has since become a finalist for the best poetry book of 2022 from the Goodreads Choice Awards. This is my personal copy that I've had since the beginning. It was one of the drafts to see if we liked the colouring, and it's covered in blood from shoots that I've done with the book. It's covered in my little notes for when I perform live, and I recently toured Australia, England, Scotland and Ireland to perform this poetry, so which I'm in absolute disbelief over. The support that I've received has been astronomical and I'm impossibly grateful from the bottom of my heart, and I keep on getting sidetracked. Back on track. I'm going to veer a lot because I haven't scripted this, because I want to keep it as much of a ramble and stream of consciousness as possible. For each show after I performed the poetry and dissected it a little bit, there was a Q&A discussional kind of panel situation where the audience could ask me any question about my art or about me or about my journey as an artist, and every single show guaranteed the question of how did I become a published poet and full-time artist, it would be asked. And so I figured, why not immortalize that and make it accessible for everyone via this rambly YouTube video. Mystery is sexy, but transparency is even sexier, because I am in the really incredible, unique position where my words and sharing my journey can help other young writers and artists. Not even young, I'm just saying young because my demographic's young, but if you're 40, hell yeah, watch this video and write a book. My journey can help other people by providing inspiration and hope, because when I look back on little Dakota before I had reached my dreams, god, it's insane that I can say that, I just wish I had evidence that it was possible, and this is evidence. This is how I became a published poet slash writer slash novelist slash author, all the good stuff coming up, and a full-time artist in the prime of my youth. Self-made, baby. I'm also morally obliged to preface this by saying my experience is of course my experience, and it is going to be unique to me and subjective to my experiences and relative to who I know and my experiences. Don't compare your path to mine. No two paths are going to look the same. I'm not sharing my story as a means of staging it as a how-to guide. I'm also sharing it to incite inspiration in you and embed advice that I received or wish I received or can offer you in the way. I posted a Q&A box on my Instagram story, so you could ask me personal questions that you'd like answered on my journey to becoming published, and so I'm going to tell my story time embedded with some relevant questions, and then afterwards I'm going to have a more discussional focused kind of conversation around questions regarding self-criticism, imposter syndrome, social media, financials, that was a huge one, and more. So stick around and I'm gonna cover as much as I possibly can, because transparency is sexy, baby. Just quickly before we continue, you know the drill. You know the drill. It is time to have a quick word about today's lovely and very relevant sponsor, Squarespace. I've worked with Squarespace many times before, and I love Squarespace because it makes maintaining and creating websites simple and fun. You can turn your passion projects into important things like careers by having a website. So how relevant is that? Designing a website with Squarespace is easy and actually fun, and I can play with elements like email campaigns, member areas, appointments, custom merch. I could keep going. You can create online stores to sell your own art and books and whatnot. You can have a little blog element to post your writing into the void. Luckily, Squarespace makes that easy and fun, and you can go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your own website, you can go to squarespace.com/dakotawarren to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you, Squarespace, from the bottom of my heart, for sponsoring this video. Chapter 1, my humble beginnings. I was born in a tiny town in rural Australia, just about the outback. My hobbies included growing up collecting dead bugs, helping my grandparents with lambing season, climbing trees, making mud pies falling out of said trees, lots of injuries, reading, and of course, writing. A lot of the questions that I receive were people subtly trying to ask if I come from nepotism when it comes to being an artist, if my parents are authors and whatnot, but no, they're not. I do not have a literary background, as in nobody in my family has published a book, but my mother loves books, and so she incited my passion for that when I was very young. I remember when I was a child, a small child, she was at university studying literature, the same thing I studied, and she'd come home and talk to me about it, and I didn't understand, but I loved the passion that was in her voice, and so that was what incited the fire within me. A lot of people ask me as well how I knew I wanted to be a writer, but it's not something I discovered. It's something I've always known. It's something I've always loved. It's something that I've always been told to pursue, and so it's something that I've always done. I used to have teachers very concerned about my creative writing projects. Some of them would end in phone calls home, but some of them would also be submitted unbeknownst to me to writing competitions like poetry and short stories. The first poem that I remember writing publicly was called Blood in a Wine Glass, and I think I was 7 years old, and my teacher asked me to title it something else so she could stick it on the wall. And then I remember being, I think I was 8 or so, and I entered a short story competition for my state, and the topic of my short story, what 8-year-old thinks of this? This is insane. I think about this a lot, actually. My short story was about, it was Christmas Eve, and a father drunk drove home to see his family from the pub, and he died and killed other people, and it was from the daughter's perspective of finding out on Christmas Eve. That never happened to me. How did I come up with that? Anyway, I also remember being in high school and we received a prompt for a poem based on a visual image, and my image was a girl looking into a mirror. And so naturally, in my deranged artist brain, I thought, oh, she's definitely in a mental asylum and she's going mad and she's thinking, how did I end up here? So I wrote a poem about that, and my teacher, whilst afraid, also submitted that to a bunch of competitions unbeknownst to me, and it led to other things. And it's about who supports you, and it's also about showing people what you can do. This also kind of transitions when people ask me about how I found my niche / voice, and I've kind of always had it. I've always had very intense writing about topics that can't really be glossed over, and so I think if you have a voice inside of you and you keep on going back to it, stick to it and build on it. Don't try and adopt a whole new voice when you're an adult, because you know, it's not authentic to you. You want to look inside and keep on building on what you have, even if it's just the beginnings. Just keep building and building and building, and it will grow. When I was 17, I ran away to the city of Melbourne. Not chasing dreams at this point, I was running. People always ask me about my job before. I was where I am now, and I worked at a supermarket. I worked at a supermarket for 7 years because I got the job as soon as I could of legal working age in Australia, which I think is 15. And so from age 15 to 18, while I was finishing school, I worked after school as much as I could on weekends. And then the second I finished school, I went to full-time because I have always had this desperate thirst for independence. And so I worked at a supermarket for a really long time to harbor the financial security that I needed to continue writing. People ask me how I found time to write working full-time and also studying eventually, but I mean, when it's the only thing that I wanted to do, it was kind of like my downtime, you know, like it wasn't something I had to come home and think, oh God, I have to write now. I'd come home and think, yes, now I get to write. But also in saying that, I fell on and off with writing a lot because I had no direction. You know, if I was 18 years old, I wasn't writing for anyone but myself. And so it was more kind of personal and journal entries, and I wouldn't write for a long time, and then I would write and then I wouldn't. And there was no consistency to it. I didn't have a clear set goal. I always knew what I wanted to do, but I had no idea how. Then I started to really hone in and focus on the how, and that was obviously to put my work in the world. I was writing little poems and journal entries and prose extracts for myself, and so I started posting them on my Instagram, which had like 300 followers. I created a blog and I would post my writings to my loyal 10 subscribers, which I'm pretty sure was entirely family and friends. But the fact of the matter is, the act of separating the art from myself and pushing it out into the world was there. And that's when the entire world opens. I used to reach out to local independent magazines and publications and ask if I could write something for them free. I always worked for free just because I wanted to write and get my name out there and have a bit of an online portfolio. I didn't know what for, but I just thought that it was a relevant step, and it was, and I'm glad that I did it. A local beauty brand in Melbourne was founded, Fluff, It's All Fluff it's called, and they adopted me very kindly and let me write for them, and I would write absolute nonsense, pure nonsense, but it was on their website and I was so proud of that. My writing for Fluff got published in Oyster magazine, which is a decent magazine in Australia. It's like a fashion lifestyle kind of magazine, and seeing my work in there was the most inspiration and motivation possible. It was my little silly articles that I did with no direction for Fluff and Oyster that got me noticed by the right people. I still didn't know at this point how to write a book or what to write or how to do anything or how to leave working full-time at a supermarket, but I knew that I was on the right direction. It felt right. It was slow, and that's the most important thing to know, is that it's slow. I didn't just come into this and go up. It was the most subtle incline over the span of like 5 years. Then COVID happened and lockdown happened and writing took a complete pause. I wouldn't write for anyone but myself, and I'd have a massive bank of writing for myself, but I was also working so much because I was an essential worker and I lost direction. And then I had this moment where I just impulse quit my job. I saved up a bunch of money because I couldn't leave the house because it was COVID, and then I impulse quit my job to write. I didn't know what I was gonna write, and I thought I was just gonna get another job in like a few months, but I just needed to write. I really needed to get that. Like it's something inside of me, and I wasn't doing it, and I felt horrible not doing it. So I took the plunge, I took the risk, and God, I love risks because God, they pay off. I'd started uni at this point as well, but because of COVID, it was all online, and I was doing Bachelor of Art, double majoring in literature and creative writing because I thought this will give me credibility in my dream career. Plus, I've always been obsessed with literature and I wanted to study books because I love books. I've always read religiously. So I quit and I was a full-time student for a while, albeit online, and I was writing again, and it felt good. Scary, but good. Chapter 2 is when I was scouted by an indie publisher, and curating, editing, the technical side of it, if you will. My publisher is impossible to define. What they did prior to publishing this book with me was mostly events, really cool artsy events and music-based things, and they also had a magazine where it was all culture related and youth related, and it was very cool and independent. One of the founders of Pure Nowhere had noticed me through my work with Fluff and Oyster, and she was following me for a while, just keeping track. I had no idea, and then she reached out to me and asked me to write them a piece for their magazine or their online article or something, and I did it because I was just happy to get my name out there. This turned into a pretty close relationship, and when Pure Nowhere decided that they wanted to experiment with publishing, they reached out to me first. And so I was an unemployed full-time student living off my savings from the supermarket, and I had just gotten a book deal. Now, neither of us expected anything from this. As I said, it was completely a passion project slash experiment induced by lockdown and curiosity and also boredom, and I was really happy to be the guinea pig. For what it's worth as well, side note, Pure Nowhere don't do things like this. I think I am their first and last poetry collection. Insane timing. This is all divine magical timing. Because Pure Nowhere published their own magazines, collaborating on a poetry collection and prose collection was a very intimate and cooperative experience. It was a massive learning curve for all of us. It was pure chaos because we were all learning the same thing at the same time together, and whilst it was pure chaos, I wouldn't change it for the world because it was just this most intense feeling of community and bonding over a love for writing. Abby and Kyla and I were all just 3 young girls in different corners of the world trying to make this thing just because we wanted to. We initially had no creative direction because we were all making it up as we went. It was more or less self-publishing, but they slapped their name on it and helped with all the hard technical side of things. It was a really beautiful experience of all of us just putting our minds into one spot trying to make something. There was no theme, there was no real theme because I had a master document of all the works I've ever really written and collected. And so I uploaded that and they went through it, and they were the ones that helped me curate and find direction and find a place to put all my thoughts and how to order it and find themes and how to construct the book. My mind was chaos. I had no idea what I wanted to do. In fact, actually, that's a lie. I had too many ideas of what I wanted to do, and when you have too many ideas, no particular idea stands out, and so having other fresh eyes help you curate was the most impossibly helpful thing as someone with a very chaotic, full mind. This is a good time to answer, a lot of people ask how many poems they should have before they reach out to a publisher or consider publishing, and I think I had like hundreds in that master doc that we narrowed down from, and I also wrote more on top of that, but we ended up publishing 45. We put 45 into the book, so I mean, it's completely up to you, but I would say have maybe more than 50 so you can work on the process of elimination and build on that should you need. I also get asked a lot if I had to change anything whilst being published and my voice was no longer just entirely mine with my non-existent audience. And yes, naturally, such is the nature when you're publishing through someone else and their name is now on your work and your work is representing them. I wouldn't call it censoring, I'd call it direction. I had a lot of poems, you know, my poems are about me and my experience with life, and there's a massive chunk, complete transparency. Transparency is sexy, right? When I was a teen, I had a tendency to be groomed by older men because goddamn Lana Del Rey rotted my brain. And so a lot of my writing was about grooming, and whilst I still want to write about this and eventually do something with it, the words needed work, basically, and my heart in the words needed work, and it was Pure Nowhere who could tell me, hey, maybe we should put this out for now and build on it later because it's worth something, but it seems a little not like it's meant to be here right now. And I completely agree, and I'm so grateful that they were the ones to say it. Once we curated it a bit better and we had some more sense of direction, we got in a lovely editor, Ria, love you. The best thing about editing was Ria and I became good friends, and so the editing process would get a bottle of wine and sit on the living room floor and just go through it, and it became fun, like this kind of ritual. And it's really hard editing poetry as well because you can't edit it too much from the voice of someone else without completely using your own voice. So your editor has to be really special to you and share a voice and see your vision. I keep on doing this, so what am I, Italian? One thing about me is I'm going to talk with my hands. Everyone's always like, wow, your hands are everywhere. Yes, I'm telling a story. I also get asked how to know when a poem is done, and quite frankly, I don't know. They had to take the document off me. They had to pry it from my hand so I'd stop editing it. I think the answer to that question is having an editor or even just a friend with a fresh pair of eyes who can tell you objectively what they think. If it were up to me, I think I'd still be editing the poems from this book to this day. I also want to reiterate that it was at this point that I did not have an online following. I did not have a massive support network. I had a few loyal followers that came with me from platform to platform via my words in Fluff and Oyster and Pure Nowhere, but I did not have a mass market for this book. This was a passion project, which brings us to chapter 3. Chapter 3, the unexpected development of an online presence and how this supplemented the final act of publishing and publicity. When at the point in time where publishing was being finalized, we had reached out to incredible photographers and collaborated with them. We had reached out to an incredible illustrator, Lydia, your work is amazing. And curation and direction was taking an amazing space, and it was at a point where Abby was doing the layout and design, and we were setting dates, and it was almost ready to be pushed out. If you don't have the book, and mind mine being covered in fake blood from a shoot, but this is the credits and the incredible people who helped along the way. I want to reiterate that we never expected to sell more than 50 copies, 100 at max. I would have been chuffed with 100, and that was to family and friends and pre-existing followers of Pure Nowhere, and I had a small following. I recognize your names, they've stuck with me until now. I love you, Bailey, I love you, Katrina, I love you, Carolina. And this leads us to how did I gain a following? And how I gained a following was, it was around this time in lockdown that everyone was online and TikTok became a thing. TikTok had been a thing for a while actually, but I jumped on board and I was talking about, you know, I posted little videos into the void about my passions like reading and writing. I'd hold up books and talk about them for the whole 15-second time limit that I had, and I'd share off my little vintage outfits, and I'd just share elements of my life. I've always liked beautiful artsy things, and so I just share them. Turns out people love when you info dump about your passions online because shock horror, people share your passions. Turns out people love when you share your art online because shock horror, some people will resonate with that. I got lucky. The algorithm favored my content, and it felt like overnight I suddenly had a small army standing behind me. An army of the most lethal kind, girls. Teenage girls, girls in their 20s, girls who like art and literature like me. This is where my story veers from being ultra relatable, because this is a privilege that I never expected to have. It came so suddenly. I remember mentioning on my TikTok that I was in the process of writing a book, and suddenly overnight, it's like my publishers and I looked at each other and said, oh, this is gonna be a bit bigger, isn't it? Yeah, it is. This gets twisted so much. People often think that I got the book deal because I had a platform, but in actual fact it's kind of the other way around, you know. I got a platform because I had this book deal and was posting about my passions and my writing and literature and my vintage fashion and all these kinds of things. And now, because I had quit my job and was studying and working on this book, I had a lot of newfound time and newfound interest to create more content, and that's when I took to YouTube. I was now studying, creating content and writing all full-time, juggling this. I was posting more on my blog, which had suddenly gone from like 20 subscribers to thousands. I started making YouTube videos about literature and art and things like that, and I was also utilizing the platform to share my words and poetry, which naturally garnered more interest in the almost published collection. Now, we opened pre-orders about 2 weeks before general sale and received over 1,000, and that was crazy because, as I keep saying, we expected about 50 in total. To receive that number for just pre-orders in the 2 weeks leading up to general sale, that was so exciting and so terrifying. It was especially because I promised naturally to sign each book and kiss a bunch of them. I think I went through about 10 Sharpies, and I remember having to kiss a bunch of books, and I went through a whole tube of lipstick. We also had to package and ship the books ourselves, and initially it wasn't going to be me involved, but there were so many orders that I'm like, yeah, bring the books to my house. We sat on my kitchen floor just wrapping and wrapping and wrapping and wrapping in sheer disbelief. My poor publishers who did this as a side quest, their entire lives now revolve around this book still to this day. None of us expected this book to completely shape and dictate our future. I still can't get over that. It's still insane to say that. Chapter 4, the impulse move to suddenly leave Australia and live in London. I impulsively applied for a visa when things started to go well, and it got approved really fast. Usually they get approved in months, and mine got approved in a few days. And so I impulsively packed up all my things and bought a one-way ticket during the midst of around pre-order time. Borders had just opened in Australia. We had locked borders because of COVID for almost 2 years. It was, now that I think back, it was very chaotic and risky and kind of insane of me, but it's the best thing I've ever done. I always get asked why London, and honestly, I can't tell you why apart from the fact that it was easy to apply for a visa because, well, you don't need a history lesson on the fact that England colonized Australia 200-ish years ago. Brutal history lesson. If you don't know about it, look it up. And so it was easy for me to get a visa. And, you know, London is compared to Melbourne, it's a land of opportunities. And if I wanted to go into writing and suddenly content creating, I felt like I did have to leave. I had newly monetized my content on YouTube, introducing the whole world of YouTube sponsors and whatnot. And so I suddenly had a guaranteed income that allowed my flexible lifestyle as a full-time artist. It was a risk, a wild one at that, considering I had found success in Australia and my book was about to be published in Australia and I was literally leaving, but I felt invincible and it felt right, and risks pay off. I had just touched down in London when general sale was released. I remember sitting on the steps of a budget hotel in Earl's Court shivering. It was so cold when I landed. It took me so long to climatize, and I was on a group video call with Abby and Kyla we had LA, we had Australia, we had London all at the same time, trying to launch this thing and organize this thing, and it was pure chaos and things kept on going wrong and we were on the call for so long. But I mean, I look back at the chaos with fondness. In the time it made me want to pull my hair out, but I look back on it with only fondness. That brings us to current day in London, writing a novel and opting for traditional publishing, and also maintaining content creation and life as a public figure. So it's now been a 1.5-ish since I moved to London and since my first book was published. It has been the most challenging and rewarding experience of my life thus far. I came in quite naive with hopes and dreams, and I had a very big wake-up call very quickly, and that was, you know, learning to be alone and live alone and be completely independent, and the trials and tribulations of the waxing and waning income as an artist in London, one of the most expensive cities, no less. I also had to learn very quickly what creative burnout was. I had some months that I was really onto it, and then I had some months where I could not even open my laptop. That's something I'm still grappling with to this day. I had to learn methods and techniques on how to avoid creative burnout as a full-time creative. I feel like I'm only just coming out on top of it all now, but I feel good about it now. You know, I've got my own techniques that I use to manage, and if you're interested I can do that in a separate video, but I know I'm gonna be very rambly in this one. We're already over time, baby. I went back to Australia over New Year's and did the press tour that I couldn't do when the book was first released, A, because of lockdown remnants, and B, because I left the country. It was the most magical full circle moment. I remember performing in Melbourne and looking out and thinking, oh wow, 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 this is my life and I've come back and this is who I am and I am the luckiest girl in the world. I'm Dakota. Hi. I write. This is a book on sun swallowing. This is a note on reverence. Flicking and curling at my hips like flames. I just girls after all. It's, you know, it's playing myself. It's performance art. After that, my publishers came over my side and we toured England, Scotland and Ireland, and that felt like the most magical moment of the circle being opened back up. Does this make any sense? It felt like, you know, the universe was saying there's more to come. The circle is being opened. You're just getting started. Hi, I'm Dakota. I read, I write. I have a little set list and I promise it makes sense. This poem I like to start with because A, it's the opening poem for the book. And then after that is my favourite part of the evening, and I sit somewhere down there and I just get to sign all your books and talk to you all and say thank you and talk about everything. Here from the feral folk comes a daughter of dirt, seraphim of barefoot ballet. All that's important is we're in this together. So tell me you love me, but don't try and kiss me because I don't need touch to know truth. Thank you. Thank you. We all have blood on our hands, but we're all too clean for hell. Thank you.
Teachers here from conferences, a moment in silence. Sorry, stand up here.
I'm sad you should take it.
I was a finalist for Best Poetry Book of 2022 from the Goodreads Choice Awards because of the support that I received from you. I still can't get over that. That's as well as the content that I'm creating and the events I've been doing, because I love doing life events now. I love being a real life girl as well as just an internet girl. But I've been working on a novel. I've been working on the novel since before the poetry collection was published, actually, and with this novel it's taking me a while to finish it because that's the nature of novels, but I'm going down the traditional publishing route for this one. I can give you some pointers that I've learned in traditional publishing because a lot of the questions were for traditional publishing, and you know, as I mentioned, my first book was with an independent publisher, so I think that traditional publishing does seem very intimidating because it's quite hard to put two and two together of how you write the book and then someone else has the book and publishes it for you. It does seem like a massive jump, but I can bridge the gap a little bit for you. I get asked a lot how to pitch to an agent, or once I've written the manuscript, how do I have an agent? And I get asked a lot as well, do I need an agent to traditionally publish? So this is a very brief take on my experience thus far in traditional publishing. Make sure you've written the book and make sure it's finalized and you're happy with it. Have the entire thing ready. I mean, if you want more of an editorial agent who's going to work with you and guide you on it, amazing, but still have the book done. That's really important. Have your book and then write a pitch. It's easy, Google it. I Googled it, I did mine based off Google. It's different for every agent what they'll ask for as well, but the general consensus usually is they want the first 10,000 words of your book if it's a novel, or if it's non-fiction, they want like a document outlining everything you're covering, or if it's poetry, they want an X amount of poems. And they also want a front cover letter, which is going to include your pitch, your author bio, and your synopsis. You can Google how to do these. There really is, there's one way to do it. Every agent is different regarding what they want. Every publisher is different regarding what they want. Personalize it to them. One agent who I got excited about and wanted to submit to a while ago wanted the entire book sent straight away because this agent didn't like to just read the beginning. She wanted the entire book, and I actually was still struggling with the ending, so I could not submit to her. To find an agent, you can just Google literary agents enter your city. Literary agents in Melbourne, literary agents in London, literary agents in New York, literary agents in Berlin. Do whatever you will and type in your city. And it's also, if you live in a small town, you can have Zoom calls, all these incredible things. They take a while to respond because they have to read a bunch of manuscripts, and you know, if you're rejected, they probably just won't respond at all, so don't hold out for that. A really important part of the process is rejection. Also, the thing about agents is they're going to take a percentage, but having an agent is like insurance, because if you go direct to publisher, you can get played, but in saying that, you don't need an agent. So, you know, it's up to you and what you think is best. Personally, I like to have an agent because I like the guidance and I like the insurance. Submit to a bunch of agents or publishers or whoever who you feel perfectly aligned with. Personally, do your research. Don't just submit to a bulk mass. Make sure you actually know what kind of work they want to work with you on. They'll notice if you haven't. And then once you've submitted it, wait. If you don't hear back, keep trying. If you hear back, meet them, see if you're a good fit. If you're not, keep trying. If you are, wow, you've done it. The thing is to try again and be resilient and persistent and wait until you found the right match and don't rush into it and, you know, get used to rejection. Just rejection's a very normal and healthy part of the process. Chapter 6. For what will thy future hold? I actually don't know how to answer this. I just wanted to say that. I mean, I'm working on a novel and then I want to do more poetry collections and more novels. I just want to keep writing for the rest of my life. And I'm also loving being a public figure. Public figure is a silly term, isn't it? But you know, it's the best to describe it. I love hosting events and sharing events, and I love doing things. I love performing. I love poetry nights. I love meeting people. I love real life events probably more than I love online interactions. I'm excited for the future, considering this is my beginning and it feels like I've lived a whole damn life in the past year and a half. So to answer this chapter, future, let's see. I'm now going to answer the questions that I received repeatedly on the Q&A segment of my Instagram about this, because they didn't slot in neatly and tidily into my little story. So let's just talk about this like a little discussion. This is in no particular order, but I'm going to start with this question because I think it's probably the most important but also the most asked, and this is, what is the biggest advice that I have to a young writer or a writer trying to get their work out there? And that is, put the damn work out there. I know it's so scary and so vulnerable posting one of your little poems on your Instagram story, even if you have 50 followers, but god damn, you have to get used to it. You have to get used to the feeling and the action of separating your art from yourself and giving it to other people. It's also going to benefit you immensely if you do have an online portfolio, and I don't mean hundreds of thousands of followers by online portfolio. I mean evidence that you have consistently posted work and evidence that you do in fact write. Posting your work into the world as well also helps garner a following, which is what happened to me, and it's when you attract different kinds of interest, which is what happened to me. And it's also when you suddenly have people that are going to interact with your work and provide unsolicited feedback. On one hand, you suddenly have people telling you how much your work resonated with them and that it helped them on their journey, and that's the most rewarding, magical feeling in the world. And I remember I was crying on my tour when people would come up to me afterwards and say, oh, I resonate with this, it helped me with this. I would just think, oh my god, the human experience, it's so intimate. And there's also the other side of unsolicited feedback, and that's when people don't resonate with your work and absolutely shit on it. Excuse my French. That leads us to how to deal with the fear of being judged. That's a hard one. There's no real straightforward answer for that. I remember before I had my agency for my content creation and I was self-managed, it was my personal email in my bio, of course, so brands could contact me. And I remember I had one person send me an email, story time, one person sent me an email that was like, it was like an essay. Damn, this was like 3,000 words. It would have taken them hours to write and edit and proofread and go over. I can't believe someone put that much passion and energy into that. I mean, I'm grateful for that. They cared so much. But anyway, the essay email was pure hate. This person was saying, how dare you write poems about the world and human nature when you're a young girl. Some people are just going to be bitter either way, you know, good for them. There is a huge difference between constructive criticism and just hate. You'll learn the difference. I think I can comfortably say that I'm now at a point where I don't actually pay attention to it, because it's kind of, you know, it's like any job. Every job has its return. And so my job as an artist in the public eye is people are going to give their opinion of my work, and that's just part of it. It's not everyone's going to resonate with everything. It's also the fun part, you know, when the art separates from yourself and goes out into the world. The fun part is that people are going to interpret it however they want. And that can be amazing because people can interpret it in a completely different way from how it was written, but it can help them or resonate with them in their own way. And that's magic, I think. It's like a sacred exchange when your work is shared with someone else and they interpret it however they want. It's in fact none of my business how it's interpreted. In all fairness though, I did host my poetry nights and my tours because I did want to explain how each poem should be interpreted, so bit of a contradictory statement on that one, Dakota. A bunch of people were also asking if social media helps when garnering an audience, and so to that very specific question of, is social media beneficial in becoming successful? How important is social media in getting published? Do you need to have a platform in order to be considered? For me, was social media beneficial? Clearly, yes, 100%. It's how I was noticed. Even before I had a following, I was noticed via my platforms that I was posting my writing onto, my small amount of loyal followers. Social media helped me develop myself not just as an artist and as a presence, but also as a public figure. That wasn't the route that I had envisioned myself taking. I'm grateful for it, and I'd like to think that I have filled this space that I've been kindly offered with warmth and personality and value. But this is not to say it's the standard, you know, this is my experience. Obviously social media helped me on my experience. Look what you're watching. I have friends who are writers who do not have an online presence, and they have been published all the same. They have been traditionally published, because remember, with traditional publishing you submit your work to agents and publishers. Do you think having a pre-existing platform is good leverage for publishing? This is interesting because as someone who's new to the industry but has been in the industry for a year and a half, there has been a massive change. On the hunt to find the agent for me, for my novel, I've had a few meetings, and I remember one particular meeting where I saw a lovely lady, and interestingly enough, she actually didn't care about what my novel was about. She just asked me how many followers I had total across all my platforms. I remember trying to discuss the synopsis, and about 2 minutes after that she was like, yeah, sounds great. How long have you been on TikTok or something like that? And I was just, you're gonna find people who care more about certain things than others. I'm not trying to give you no hope by saying you need a platform. Yes, if you don't have a platform, you're screwed. But I'm also going to be completely transparent with you, because transparency is sexy, and tell you that it is something they're on the look for now. I also don't really have any advice on how to build a platform, because I swear mine felt like it was handed to me. I mean, maybe I'm saying that because I have major imposter syndrome. I think I did work really hard on my platform, actually. I would very, very carefully talk about all these books and offer recommendations and whatnot. It's actually a good time to transition into talking about imposter syndrome now, because I got so many questions on imposter syndrome. And yes, my god, I have imposter syndrome. I have imposter syndrome making this video right now. I sat down here and stared at the wall for a while and thought, who am I to give advice? Who am I to give advice? Who am I to share my story? Imposter syndrome is so real, and I think it comes in waves for me. I'll have moments of clarity where I realize, oh, I've done all these things because I worked damn hard for them, and then I'll have moments where I get in my head and think, oh, it's just because of this, or I'm not actually doing that well, or my achievements are actually quite minor, or people only like me because they think I'm pretty. People love to comment that people only like my work because I'm pretty, and that's such a funny hey comment to me, because thank you for calling me pretty. But yes, imposter syndrome is real. I've not gotten rid of it. It comes in waves. I mean, I think imposter syndrome's healthy and normal, and I think it's a good sign and shows that you're genuinely surprised and grateful that you've made your way into your dream field. Maybe I made that perspective up just to feel better about my crippling imposter syndrome. I got a lot of questions as well on how I found the confidence to actually do this, and this is a funny question for me because I've never thought about this. I've never thought about it that way. I swear about 50% of the questions were people asking how I found the courage and confidence to do this, and it didn't feel like something that I needed courage or confidence for. I've always loved being in front of the screen. I've always been a little performer. This, you know, I feel this feels good, this feels normal, and then putting my work out into the world, it feels good and it feels normal. It's what I've always wanted to do. I suppose it is really brave to share your art with the world, because it is so damn vulnerable to cut out this piece of yourself and serve it up on a platter for others. Accidental cannibalism metaphor. I think the only advice that I have to offer for how I found the courage and how to find the courage is the vulnerability is thrilling, and yes, it's a risk, but god, the rewards can only come with the risks. An interesting question that I got asked as well that I couldn't find anywhere else to slot in was how to keep your voice personal, how to keep your work personal when there is an increased demand for particular tropes and pockets of voice in literature. And I think it's a common misconception actually that agents and publishers are looking for a specific trope that's hot right now. They're looking for voice, they're looking for unique voice. They want something new. They're not looking for something done right now, they're looking for something new. Don't be afraid of that, don't worry, that's a misconception. People ask, did university help? Did university help with my voice and my skill and all those things? And I mean, I'm gonna say this with complete sexy transparency, and I think the main thing university helped me with was credibility. You mentioned that you studied creative writing, and people are going to be so much more likely to actually believe that you know what you're talking about than if you say you're self-taught. But I've always had my voice. I've always had my proclivities and preferences with writing. Sure, my teacher helped a little bit by saying, you use a lot of cliches, drop this and drop that, and you say this word too much, and noticing little things that I didn't notice within my own work. But like any pair of fresh eyes could do that. I'm not trying to discourage you from a creative writing degree, but I'm also saying that you don't need it. The main thing it helped him with was credibility, which is interesting because of course no one's going to believe a young girl who's self-taught about writing. I had to go to university so people would listen to me. One of the biggest questions that everyone had was financials. How do I support myself? How do I support myself for this entire thing? I saved up so much money before I quit my job and plunged into being a full-time student and artist. So much money. That actually wasn't really intentional. It was because we had lockdown for 2 years and I couldn't actually do anything with the money that I was making from working in a management position full-time. So I had money saved, and so I quit. The way that we did financials for On Sun's following was because it's not a traditional publishing house. They don't have the giant banks to do a giant advance. You know, when you do traditional publishing, you generally get an advance. But, you know, with the independent publishers, we just kind of signed a contract and said we'd split a particular percentage, of profits each month as payments come through. So that's how we did it. I can't tell you exact figures because I don't know the exact figures, but it's not a livable wage just off that book. It was the content creation that saved my ass. YouTube and TikTok and Instagram coming into all of these social media platforms that are willing to pay me to keep creating the content that I've always created. That is what supported me while I continued to work on that book and everything else. Traditional publishing generally give you an advance, which means that once an agent and the publisher agree and enjoy the book, they will offer you a lump sum. Sometimes after that it can go towards revenues and royalties. I've seen someone sell a book for a few thousand. I've heard stories of people selling books for $1 million or more, so you know, that's entirely relative. Do you need to have money beforehand when it comes to publishing? Self-publishing, yes. Traditional publishing, no. Indie publishing, no. You know, the act of publishing is it's somebody or a team taking your work out of your hands and editing it and guiding you, but also saying they believe in you and trust you enough to fund the project. But when it's self-publishing, of course you're going to need to fund it yourself. But I mean, a way that I've heard around this is pre-orders. You can do pre-order campaigns and people will happily wait a month or so whilst you collect their money and then put that towards printing and everything. But yes, if you're self-publishing, of course, you're going to need to fund it. A really interesting question that I got asked that I'm going to finish this with is, do you ever regret being so public about your life? And that's an interesting question because I came into all this so suddenly. I came into it quite late, you know, because I've got friends, some of my best friends have grown up on the internet. They created YouTube channels when they were like 14 years old, and it's been a decade or more of them being online. It's been hardly 2 years for me of being online. And so I'm grateful that my frontal lobe was a little bit more developed and I could choose what I share. I mean, being so public about my life, I'm not actually that public about my life. I'm public about my art and I'm public about the things that I love, but my personal life I don't talk that much about. I'm quite careful with it actually. So no, I don't regret this. I regret nothing about this. In fact, I'm in love with every decision that I've made, but it's just interesting coming into it late and having a more so formed mind and just seeing the effects and the repercussions that it can have and how scary people can be. I'm lucky though, I'm lucky. I think I've got a pretty safe, comfy corner of the internet. I've had some absolute insane situations where I've had stalkers, but that's okay. It's not okay. I feel like this video has been me incessantly rambling about myself for an hour. That is exactly what it is actually. I don't feel like that, I know that. I want to say a genuine thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here with me on this journey, and I'm so glad that I can share it with you via this. I'm in such a unique position where I can bridge the gap on publishing and creating and all these things because I can talk to you about it on these platforms, and so thank you for letting me do that, and thank you for caring. I should leave you to it. Whatever you're doing, I'll leave you to it. I love saying that, I'll leave you to it. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for listening to what I have to say. Thank you for supporting me, and I hope that you are inspired and motivated to go create what you want to create. I love you inordinately, and good luck. I'll see you next time.